Okay, so we're recording. What is a griot? And let's begin. So, in West African culture, both historically and today, each tribal clan had its own griot. A griot was basically a clan member who was a combination historian, musician, and storyteller. Again, basically they're historian, musician, storyteller. In fact, if we quote a man named Fude Musa Suso, who's one of West Africa's most respected griots, so these griots still exist today, he would say that a griot was an oral historian and a musician. So continuing, griots were trusted court advisors to the kings of West Africa. So they were trusted court advisors. So when I talk about court advisors, basically when we talk about a king's court, that means everyone who's kind of like close to the king's inner circle. So you got the king, and you got like everyone around him. He's probably got some relatives who like work with him. There's probably some advisors, a general, there's those kinds of people. And then you would have a griot. Would be in this circle. So griots would be very close to the king. Very trusted advisors. So, and this went down all the way from the 12th century to the 20th century, or the 1100s, all the way to the 1900s, that griots would be very close to the kings in Africa. Now, every king wanted to have a griot to recite the history of the kingdom and to pass it down father to son. So basically, if you are a griot, you were a griot because your dad was a griot. And your son after you would be a griot. Now, there's also griotees, which would be just a female griot. And in that case, it would be passed down from mother to daughter. So again, like we talked about yesterday, history wasn't mostly used to be written down, to be passed down to people. History mostly was passed down by this oral tradition. We see a musician here playing right here. A griot would come out and would sing or tell the story, much like the video that we watched yesterday in class of the griots. All right? And they would recite the history of the entire kingdom. Now, in addition to the griots being next to the king, besides just the kings, every clan would have their own griot as well. So every clan would have their own griot. Now, when I say clan, what I basically mean by that, that's like a large extended family. So it's someone who traces their heritage back to an ancestor, possibly like a great-great-grandfather. So a clan, pretty much, you have an ancestor, and then you have your family tree branching out. And eventually you see all these people are kind of like related. They're a family tree. This would be the clan. So each clan would have their own griot, who would talk about, well, we started from this person, then it was passed on to this person, and then this person was the lead of the family, and they would also tell the family's history. So in West Africa, the clans each have their own griots, and the clans are pretty much like large families. Any of you guys ever had like a big, huge family get together? Where you start seeing like the second cousins, and the aunts, and the uncles, and the great aunts, and these people who you had no idea who you even related to? Like, so you're my second, third cousin on this side, okay, and you don't even know who you're related to. That's kind of how a clan is, pretty much. And each kind of like that big, huge family get together, and there would be their own like family historian who would keep track of all the family. That's what griots would do for the clan. So again, a griot is a historian and a musician, is what you want to know. Could be for clans and also for the empires or kingdoms. When I speak about these empires, we're going to talk more about them later. We see there's the Sonoki or Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, and the Songhai Empire. We're going to talk about those three empires in a later unit on Africa. We'll go into more detail about them. All right, so let's move on to the jobs and the duties of a griot. So let's talk about the jobs and duties of a griot. All right, so a griot memorized the clan's significant events. Now I'm going to give you a big list of things. When I give you a list, how many, do you write them all down?
No.
You want to have like 2 to 4, maybe like 3 would be a good number. So griots, again, their jobs, pretty much they would record a clan's significant events like births, deaths, marriages, hunts, wars, guaranteeing that the continuity of the collective heritage or culture. Basically ensuring that the culture and the heritage would continue to be passed on from generation to generation. Basically, so the family, the events that happened in the family would not be forgotten. Or for the kingdom, that the events that happened in the kingdom would not be forgotten. Does this make sense? Each clan had their own griot. But then, like, if there's a big empire, there'd be a griot kind of like right next to the king, like the head griot, pretty much of the kingdom. Okay? It was said in Africa, a saying, if you want some cloth or clothing, go to the weaver. If you want an axe or a knife, then go to the blacksmith. But if you want to know the history of the people, you must go to the griots. So, they were often accompanied by the kora, which is the stringed instrument that we see right here. This is the kora. I actually think it looks like a real early version of a banjo or guitar. And I think, the strings here, you play them, it's kind of got chords. It's in a lot of ways it's similar to it. If you look at this through a lens of cultural diffusion, you can see how this could change over the years to become a banjo or a guitar. But they were often accompanied by a kora, by drumming, by the clapping of villagers or people who were listening, and they would tell the story. And they would do this set to music. So again, you kind of want to think about, we talked about Homer and the Odyssey, how he was a blind poet who would tell the entire story of the Odyssey and people would listen. Griots were much the same way, except for there wasn't really the fantasy part of it. Not the Cyclopses and the island of the nymphs and all that stuff. It was more just like the history of what actually happened. So, it was said in West Africa, still said to this day, that when a griot dies, a library has burned to the ground. Yes, so griots were full of information, just like a library. So one died, it was like a library burning to the ground. And of course, the hope is that griot would have trained his son, or that griotee would have trained her daughter before the death, so the information could be passed on. I just want to ask a question here by show of hands. Who in here has read The Giver? Do you see kind of a connection here? A little bit of a connection to the book The Giver, where the griots are kind of like, the giver is kind of like, has to have all this history given to him to remember. The griots are a little similar that way, except for I would say that the griots probably have a much better life than the character in The Giver. So, let's move on. So, I'm going to talk about the historian Thomas A. Hale. It's actually him right here. The historian Thomas A. Hale, he has an amazing job as far as I'm concerned. So he was a historian. He wanted to go to West Africa, and he wanted to find these griots, and he wanted to interview them so he could record the history and bring it back to America where we don't really know much about it. So he went and he found these griots, and he interviewed them. And here you see him interviewing one of the griots right there. And he said his job description, if he had to make a job description for griot, it would be historian, genealogist, that means like studying the genes of people or how genes are passed on, advisor, spokesperson, diplomat, mediator, interpreter, translator, musician, composer, teacher, warrior, witness, and praise singer would be a list he would give for the griots. Griots were so valued, and again this is according to Thomas A. Hale, they were so valued that they were not allowed to leave the chief's side, especially during discussions, trials, deliberations. So if you had like a trial, the griot would have to be there to hear everything, to hear the case. If you had a war, someone was attacking you, the griot would have to be there. So I want you to think, like, why would you want the griot to be there during these things? So again, the griot would provide a lot of wisdom to the kings in many cases, so it would be very important that they would be there by the king's side. Okay, so, and the griot did much more than just, like, give history and recite history. The griots also had the job to, like, take the past and see, well, how could we use this today? Here's what the great kings did in the past. Maybe we should do that too. Or here's mistakes we made, so maybe we should do this instead. So what does it take to be a griot or a griotee? First off, you're kind of born into the position. Basically, your parents were a griot or griotee. It was passed on to you. I had a student ask last time, well, what if I didn't have a son? What do you do then? I imagine it probably have to be like a nephew or someone like that. Then it'd probably go to the next family member. Kind of like it's what royal families do when there's a king. So, so continuing there. There you go. Along with that, griots are almost like their own like ethnic group or their own like kind of their own category in West Africa. It's kind of like a lot of people who'd be growing up would be maybe learning how to farm, learning how to hunt, becoming a blacksmith, doing another job. Where the griot would be, for their job, would be learning from their parents how to make music, how to remember all this history. So again, I use the giver analogy. It's kind of like they're separate from society. They're in society, but they're also, the griot is always recording history. So it always makes it a little bit different to be the griot. They are respected and they are feared. Now, if you think about that, they're going to be respected because of how much history they have and everything, but feared. Basically, if the griot doesn't like you, or the griot sees you, more importantly, as a bad person, when the griot performs their song and tells the history, they may be not speaking well about you. What if you're a king and you pass on? The griot passes the songs on to the next griot. How is your role in history going to look? Not very good. You're going to have griots singing about you for hundreds of years saying how bad you were. So they are respected and they are feared. Along with that, basically a griot has to be like a professor or like pretty much almost like a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. Plus they have to be an expert musician. So let's take a look at this picture right here. This is Thomas A. Hale, professor from America, interviewing a griot. This is basically one professor interviewing another professor. Except for this professor has to be like a composer, musician, and a performer. I don't think he has to be that. So it's like you have to be, kind of like a one part professor, one part Bruno Mars. You have to be like kind of both. You have to be able to perform at the same time. So. Continuing with griots, it was long thought that like women didn't have much power in West African society, and we're finding out that that's actually not true. There are griotees, which are female griots. Now we don't know if they had many roles with the king. So far we think no, but griotees did sing. They sing at many social occasions, many family events, many weddings. So griotees, or female griots, had power as well as the males. And I will actually stop.